Hi, welcome. My name is Heidi. I am a PhD student at the University of Oslo, and I'm very happy to be here and talk a little bit about my project and the sort of the broader topics of behavioral genetics and musicality. Yes, I can start my presentation. Yeah. Yes. So the outline for today's presentation is to give you just a very brief overview of my PhD project. I will also talk a little bit about the background of the scientific study of musicality in general. And then I'll move on to a more behavioral genetics approach. And again, show you the design of the project that I'm working on, and then just some final concluding remarks. So this is an overview of the project that I'm working on. It is a collaboration between Ritmo and Promenta at the University of Oslo, and we also work together with the National Institute of Public Health and the Norwegian Twin Registry. So the overall objective is to get a better understanding of musical abilities and with specific attention to rhythmic abilities. And we will we're using the twin method to look at the genetic and environmental contributions to the phenotypic profile. And we will also explore the phenotypic association with other traits such as personality and cognitive abilities. And finally, we will look at the relationship between musicality and health. This is my excellent colleagues. Bruno Lang is my supervisor and also the PI. And then you have different researchers from different fields such as musicology, personality psychology, and twin methodology. And yeah, I should mention that there's something wrong with the formatting, so please don't be too distracted. Yeah, so we'll start with the broader topic of scientific study of human musicality. So music is considered to be a human universal. So to date, there is no, all known cultures have some sort of music. And the ability to synchronize to musical rhythm is largely unique to humans, though there are some species that also seem to have some sort of rhythmic synchronization. And music has existed in human societies since prehistory, and music engagement, dancing, music making have played a very important role in people's emotional experience, well-being, sense of belongingness, and cultural identity. So this flute, which is in the figure on the bottom there, is one of the oldest findings of a musical instrument. So it's dated, I think, 60,000 years ago. So that means that there's already then there must have been some sort of music present. And we humans are like such a musical species. We spend a massive amount of time and resources on these music-related activities. And as Daniel Levitin notes in his book, that this can almost be considered a human obsession. Now, the reason why these abstract sounds have such a great value for our species, it's fascinating, and it remains sort of a conundrum. And this is something Darwin also reflected on in his book Descent of Man. So he wrote that as neither the enjoyment nor the capacity of producing musical notes are faculties of the least direct use to man in reference to his ordinary habits of life, they must be ranked among the most mysterious with which he is endowed. Yet 10 years later, in his biography, he noted that if I had to live my life again, I would have made it a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music at least once every week. for perhaps the parts of my brain now atrophied would thus have been kept alive through use. The loss of these tastes is a loss of happiness and may possibly be injurious to the intellect. I can read the rest. Either way. So the origins of music is something perhaps that we might not ever get an answer to. But of course, as researchers, there's a lot of research being done to explore music, cognition, music in the brain, and there's a variety of disciplines that approach this topic. So there's people from philosophy, from psychology, from neuroscience. So a lot of evidence has occurred over, especially since the 1990s. So we now know that there's no single music center. Music cuts across diverse neuroanatomical and cognitive domains. And it is also dependent on other cognitive functions, such as attention and musical short and long-term memory. And when you look at music-induced emotions, you see activations of virtually all emotion structures in the brain. So this is just a schematic overview from a recent review showing brain areas that are involved in music production and perception. And you can see in the for emotions, it covers a lot of different neural structures. So the wide neural substrates of music, it sort of echoes the multifaceted nature of musical abilities. Musicality is a very complex and is polymorphic construct, and it has a number of associated skills such as emotional sensitivity, production skills, creative skills, and these different sub-skills, they may or may not be correlated with each other. So you might know someone who has excellent rhythmic skills, but perhaps their singing skills or tonal perception is not that good. And there's also substantial individual variation in these music-related skills, both throughout the general population and within skilled professionals. So, for example, the skills that a DJ has to have is quite different from, for example, a performer. As a DJ, you don't necessarily need any musical training, or you don't need to play an instrument, but you have to have this sort of very receptive abilities. And Susan Rogers, who is pictured in one figure there, she's both excellent record engineer. She worked with Prince and a lot of different people, but she's also a doctorate in psychology and a professor. So I don't think she has any formal music training, but I'm not completely sure. And then you have artists like Otis Redding, who is not necessarily known for his technical skills, or I don't think he played that many musical instruments, but he had this really raw and emotional performance. And there's a story that said that the Rolling Stone watched a performance of his, and they were really nervous to go on stage after him because people were almost exhausted after he's been on stage. So there are some core questions. Even though there's been a lot of scientific interest in musicality, there are some core questions that still remain. So what does it actually mean to be musical, and how do we conceptualize it, and how do we measure it? So this is just a few of the many, many different tests that can be used to measure musicality. And earlier you saw a lot of tests that were measuring specific, very narrow musical abilities, auditory discrimination of, for example, pitch. And now recently there's been more movement towards more broader questionnaires that are shown on the left, such as the Musical Sophistication Index, created by researchers at Goldsmiths in London. And then you have Umbach, which we used in our study. And there's many, many, many more. I also wanted to mention a little bit, because there's a lot of interest in music, the association between music and musicality, health and well-being. So I just wanted to touch a little bit upon that. So compared to there's been a lot of scientific explorations in terms of using music as a therapeutic agent, and especially since the 1950s. And there are at present a lot of converging evidence that shows that music might play a role in promoting health and well-being. So, for example, observations indicate that some of the beneficial effects of music can be accounted for by its ability to regulate neurochemical and endocrine and immune systems, and thereby affecting diverse aspects of cognition and behaviors, including reward, pleasure, social affiliation, stress, arousal, and also structural and functional neuroplasticity. And commonly, it's been applied as an adjacent tool or a therapeutic tool for various neurological disorders, including traumatic brain injury, neurodegenerative diseases. And music can, of course, not alone cure these diseases, but it may help to sort of alleviate certain symptoms and increase well-being and quality of life for these patients. And right now, there's a documentary in Norway where they made a choir consisting of people with dementia, and they're sort of documenting this whole process and their well-being throughout this TV show, which is really interesting. And I found this quote in a book that I read called The Story of Soul Music, Nowhere to Run. So I think it illustrates one way that music can have an effect. So Joe Brown, father of James Brown, he said that for a few years in an era characterized by the word movement, soul music gave many of us somewhere to run, to get out of ourselves, to feel free, if only for 2.5 minutes aside. So it's not necessarily like this cures disease, but it really means a lot for well-being, quality of life. Yes, so compared to the more clinical and therapeutic uses of music, so how do everyday music engagements influence our physical and mental health? So everyday uses of music can be used to serve a variety of functions, ranging from distraction to transcendent experiences, and it may have profound effects upon long-term overall health and well-being. Now, there are several theories that seeks to describe the ways that music may be adaptive and beneficial, and one is illustrated here in this figure, but some of the core commonalities in these theories include music's ability to facilitate communication of emotions, self-identity, managing and regulating mood, emotions, and stress. Yeah, but there's not a lot of research on this so far. So we don't know exactly in what way and to what extent individuals' differences, for example, personality, genetic or biological factors play in this association. And it's important to recognize that the way that people engage with music and experience music and their preferences and motivations and emotional sensitivity is likely to be some of the main forces that influence health outcomes. And it would also be important to consider genetic and environmental influences, as well as the interaction between with genetic risk factors when exploring this association. So now we're moving more over to the behavioral and genetics part of musicality. So I don't know if there's any questions so far. Good.
I have
Yeah.
curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a point of departure for taking a behavioral genetics approach to musicality is, as I mentioned, that music is a universal human trait. The capacity to perceive, produce, and enjoy music is present in nearly all people, even in infancy. And the fact that musical talent aggregates in families, so you can think of the Bach family, who had, I think, 50 known musicians and composers over several generations. So these sort of shared tendencies and the early manifestations of musicality suggest that there's some sort of genetic factors at play here. But we also know that there's an enormous diversity in musical systems throughout the world and across cultures. And yeah, so combined, this sort of suggests that music might be part of our biology and genome, though it is differently shaped by our cultural upbringing. So in this area, you can ask questions like, to what extent and in what ways is musicality influenced by our genes? And what is the role in genetic and environmental factors in the association between musicality and other non-musical traits like personality? So I'll just, since Lilian covered so many topics of behavioral genetics so excellently yesterday, I will just briefly touch upon to refresh our memories. So behavioral genetics is an area of psychology that involves the use of genetic methodologies to study the nature and origins of individual differences in human behavior. And broadly, in terms of methods, it can be divided into quantitative methods and molecular genetic methods. I will not cover molecular genetic methods. There's only one study that's been done, and it was on beat synchronization. It's quite recent. So for those interested, you can read that. But you can just know that it's also like when you're exploring this sort of new phenotypic field, that it's important to do quantitative methods first, because you need a broader assessment of the phenotype before you move on to more molecular genetic approaches. So quantitative methods refers to traditional methods using genetically informative designs, including twin, family, and adoption studies. And these studies, it doesn't measure anything related to genetics per se, but use this knowledge about genetic similarity between relatives combined with measures of phenotypic similarity to estimate the degree to which genetics influence individual differences in the traits. Yeah, so the premise for the classical twin study, which I'm working on, is actually pretty simple-minded. So if genetics are important, then we would expect monozygotic twins who share 100% of their genetic material to be more similar than dizygotic twins who only share 50% on average. Or alternatively, if it's the rearing environment that's shaping things like intelligence, then the similarity between the two types should be roughly the same. And then you can use statistical methods and twin methodology to further decompose, because you can decompose the phenotypic variance into genetic variance and environmental variance, but you can further decompose the environmental influences into shared and non-shared environmental variance. Yes, so what do we know so far? Most of our current knowledge about the behavioral genetics of musicality, it stems from rather large Swedish twin study, which was conducted in 2012. I think they recruited up to around 10,000 twins. That's another thing with twin studies, you need quite large sample sizes. So they used a test called the Swedish musical discrimination test to measure auditory perception skills. And they found moderate heritability estimates for rhythm, melody, and pitch discrimination, whereas the remaining variance was explained by non-shared environmental influences. So they showed that both genetic and environmental influences contribute to, for example, perceptual music skills, but to varying degrees for different musical traits and for males and for females. I should also mention that, like I said earlier as well, that these tests are also dependent on other cognitive skills, such as working memory and they're cognitively quite demanding. So there might be some genetic sources there as well. Yeah. Just slightly irritating the formatting thing, but fine. So you can also use multivariate approaches in twin studies. So you can look at the genetic and environmental architecture between phenotypes. So we tend to see a high degree of correlation between certain phenotypes. So, for example, depression, anxiety, musicality, intelligence. So we can then ask, perhaps this is because of some common genetic sources, which is called pleiotropy, or maybe it's because of common environmental sources. Yeah, so you can use twin analysis to partition this correlation into common and unique genetic and environmental effects to explore, for example, the genetic overlap between phenotypes. And for most complex phenotypes, such as musicality, the genes involved appear to have pleiotropic effects, affecting a number of different characteristics. So one of the approaches that's been done in this regard in musicality is looking at the association between musicality and intelligence. Now, there's a lot of correlational studies and longitudinal studies showing that music training enhances cognitive abilities. This was ignited by studies in the 90s, so-called Mozart effect Mozart effect, where participants listened to Mozart for like 10 minutes and they saw an increased cognitive capacity after that. But this has not been replicated. It was probably due to just general arousal. But the longitudinal studies, as I say, they find a positive association between music training and other non-musical cognitive skills. Findings from twin studies, however, they indicate that this is due to shared genetic influences, and this appears to also mediate the propensity to engage in musical activities in general. And when it comes to personality, there's like less is known. There is a positive association between music engagement and the openness to experience dimension of the Big Five inventory. But again, a twin study indicate that this association between music practice and personality appear to be driven by common genetic influences. So the authors of these studies, they concluded that there might be some trait complex, making some certainly more inclined to invest resources in music and music activities. Yeah, my project. We did data collection last year. We divided the data collection in two parts because it was quite extensive. We casted a broad net to try to capture a lot of different phenotypes and many, like I mentioned, many dimensions of musicality. So we invited approximately 7,800 adult monozygotic and dizygotic twins via the Norwegian Twin Registry. And the first part they received, it was the questionnaire part, where they answered questions that assessed physical and mental health, personality, empathy, social support, and then the music-related variables. So we got responses from 2,600 twins. Yes, and then 1 month later, we sent out a test battery consisting of music perception tests and cognitive tests. In total, 10. I will go a little bit more into the musicianship part and the music-related part. So we used the MuseBook, as I mentioned earlier, and it got 4 different modules, so it covers musicianship, that's informal and formal music background, and also other variables such as have you ever exercised to music or on a regular basis, and like the level of musical enrichment in childhood environment. And there's a module covering musical capacity and music preferences, which is divided into 6 broad genres. And then it's the music use motivation module, covering subscales such as musical transcendence, emotional regulation. Yeah. I can't read from here, but it's just an example from the MUSEC. So it was a 5-point scale, and then, yeah, I think it's 60 questions in total. Yeah, for the melody and pitch and rhythm and timing tests, we had, was it five tests that were in the temporal domain. And then we had 2 in the spectral domain. So we wanted to both assess musical rhythm on different levels of granularity. So we have certain tests that were developed by the musicology department or people in my project group. And then you also have the Swedish discrimination test that we were allowed to use to be able to compare our findings to the previous like large-scale Swedish study. And we also used another test called the beat alignment test, which is developed in England. I have some musical excerpts, but I don't know how well it will be heard online, but I can try. So this is the but. So the idea here is that there's a metronome that overlays.
Just one question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I'm following. What is the difference between temporal and spectral domain? What are the differences?
So temporal is a rhythm, and spectral is more pitch and melody perception. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So you're supposed to hear if the metronome that overlays the music in this test is aligned with the underlying beat in the song. Was it? Yeah? No? Oh. It was not. So P Center is a test device by Anne and Tor in my project group. It measures beat and timing discrimination abilities, and the stimuli consists of 2 parallel sequences of 4 isochronous woodblock sounds. So the task is to judge whether the 2 sequences are perfectly aligned or not. They can be misaligned, can be perfectly aligned, or they can be misaligned by 2 to 100 milliseconds. One more time. Perfectly aligned. Oh, it's 2 milliseconds. It's difficult to hear. And then it's the pitch test. So here the task is to judge whether the first tone in a pair of 2 is higher or lower in pitch than the second tone. So lower or higher, the second?
Yes, I know here.
Yeah. I think it's higher, actually. Let me hear again. This is embarrassing. I think it's higher. I will check later, so I don't.
I don't have a good music.
But you can see that these tests, they differ quite a lot. Some of them are more naturalistic, and some of them are very like reduced or reductionistic. Yes. Oi. So, yeah, this is just to show that we also, both as an incentive and of course like citizen science, we told the twins that you can, if you want a feedback on your musical profile, then you can check here. So we're sort of in the final process of finalizing these, which has also been quite a lot of work, but it's a way to like increase participation, but also like to give them an insight into the research that they're actually contributing to. Just some concluding remarks. So what does behavioral genetics add to musicality research? Well, it can serve as a roadmap to the underlying biology. It is a tool for understanding individual differences, and it can help elucidate the genetic architecture between phenotypes, and also it can help to get a more nuanced understanding of the association between music engagement and, for example, health-related traits. Yes. Here are some recommended readings if you're interested in any of these topics. So The Science and Psychology of Music is a quite recent book. And the Oliver Sacks book, Musicophilia, is also an excellent book. And then some other review articles. And something that I didn't talk about today, but which is very important, is the sort of awareness of the ethical issues when it comes to behavioral genetics research in general, but also in terms of musicality, because there's this historical intersection of human genetics research and eugenics. So this requires sensitivity to the ethical and social issues that accompany this field. And I think I have a final treat. It's just for those of you who are old enough to remember the song, and also prone to earworms, which is songs that get stuck in your head, like I am. I wish you a good day. For me, I automatically hear this song.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, then I'm done. Should I close the presentation? Yep.
Okay, good hearing. Yeah. So any question from the?
Let's talk with Alice as people write their questions.
I have many.
I figured.
Can I start?
Yeah.
Yeah. So first, thank you for a very, very nice presentation. And I mean, I'm not familiar at all with the field, and I could follow, and I love music. So I think it's a topic that it's also very easy to be engaged, kind of. I would start first. I'm curious because you mentioned about the Swedish study and then the comparison. Do you have similar studies in other culture? I was thinking especially those culture where we know that culturally music is quite strong, Latin music, African. Do you know if it exists something similar? Not exactly the same methodology, but like this cultural approach.
Yeah. No, there's no like genetic studies. There's not. But there's a lot of cross-cultural studies. So I don't know if like I know one of the guys working at IPMO, he's done a lot of cross-cultural research and also been in Africa, and so there's a lot of interesting research there.
Yeah. Really interesting, right, to have the behavior genetics also in a cross-cultural approach. And I was also thinking, that's my cultural mind as well, thinking about immigrants. You know,
Yeah.
like the people who will be great. And I'm gonna talk about myself because I'm quite into music. So for me, as you know, like when I come to Brazil, like music can connect me to my roots.
Mm.
And that's a sort of really therapy when I'm there. I was just curious how it is for those who immigrate. Now, if you think about, let's say Latin, Africa, and I'm just talking about those places that we know that people dance and listen to music a lot. And then when we migrate to countries in which maybe music it's less, if the word is important, but maybe less present in everyday life, how music actually can work as a sort of integration, adaptation, I don't know, acculturation. I was just thinking.
Jung, just remember that Jung, who also studied Mo, she also did a study where participants had to listen to music from different cultures, and then afterwards they were asked like how what should I say, like how interested or how open they are to that culture, and that it increased after listening to music from their culture. So there's some.
Because, and do you have measures about like music and emotion? For example, emotion expression or emotion regulation? Because you mentioned that the music, it's like in the questionnaire about musicality, there are aspects related to that, right?
Absolutely.
But do you have like correlational studies about like the scores on these tests and let's say emotion regulation or emotion expression?
I'm sure there's a lot, but I can't like. But there's a very new test that we also employ, which I didn't show today. But it's also a listening test where you have to recognize whether the emotion expressed in music is either happy or sad, blah blah blah. So we employ that as well. But I should mention that that's one of the cultural universals or music universals is actually emotion recognition, that you're able to, even though if I were to listen to, say, Chinese music, I will be able to recognize whether it's happy music, sad music. So there's some universals there as well.
Yeah. Just one more. There is any developmental approach when it comes to understand like musicality like this?
Yeah.
Like starting like from infancy, as you mentioned that.
There's a lot of study. There's some studies on infants, but there's a longitudinal study running now in England, but it's from like from like school age, and I think they're following them for like 10 years or something, and it's a lot of participants. So it's they just published a paper now, and it's really really interesting.
Yeah. I was also thinking about like. People who, because I'm more into dance kind of field, and I think when we dance, we are also very connected to music. Yeah, so I was just thinking, like for example, those who start dancing at very early age, how that would impact as well musicality. Yeah, I'll let the others make questions. Thank you.
I have a question, but if you want to go first. Okay. So following up with Heidi, thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. So I have some very, I think, straight to the point questions. One thing that I'm wondering is, when you mentioned the pleiotropic part, is people who have, let's say, a higher genetic musicality, are these people happier? Are these people more protected against mental health? And in the case that they are people that have, genetically speaking, less musicality, with musical training, could they reach these levels of happiness or protection against mental illness? So in other words, my question would be, would the beneficial effects of music be to pleiotropy, to the genetic, let's say, to the music genes, or actually to the effect of music itself, practicing music and listening to music?
Yeah, that's super interesting, and it's some of the things that we're going to look at. There's not been done any specific specific studies on that. There's a couple of recent studies from the Swedish group. The thing is that it's likely to be very complex because when you look at musicians, there's a high incidence of like anxiety, depression. But it might be that these are genetically disposed to depression, and then they seek out music because it is like a therapeutic agent. So that's why it's really, really important to have sort of that genetic understanding as well, and to be able to to control for the genetic part.
Or maybe they're more sensitive to emotion.
Yeah.
Not necessarily happier or sadder,
Yeah.
but have more emotional variation. Maybe that's the association. So you would both have people who are very happy, maybe, and people who are depressed, or this would vary over the. It's logical as well.
There's also like some studies that explores how you use music. So, for instance, if you use music to remove your feelings, or I don't remember the technical term, but if you like suppress, then it predicts worse, or the health outcomes is worse. But if you use it to sort of what's it called again? Cognitive reappraisal, then it predicts better health outcomes. So it's likely to be very, very complex. And we also, as one of the things that we want to look at, to, for example, people high in neurosis. Thank you. I can't speak anymore. Do they use music in a qualitative, different way than people who score low on neuroticism?
It's interesting maybe to see also, because that can be like my daughter uses music when she wants to regulate emotion.
Yeah.
So when she's frustrated, mama can listen to music.
Yeah.
But then it's again like, it will be interesting to see the genetics here, but the cultural aspect, when we use music a lot. Yeah, but then, for example, she's very into arts in general. That was something that I thought when you said about being sensitive. It may be that we are those who are very connected to emotions and maybe feel that in a almost like overwhelming way. Art is a sort of a channel to explore, then music, painting, and
absolutely. Did it answer your question, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Do you know if there is some new researches concerning the use of music therapy for children with neurodevelopmental disorders, for instance, ADHD and autism in Oslo? There is some study concerning the effects, possible positive effects of these therapies. But I would like to know specifically about also the methodology, how do you understand the effects of these therapies? You know?
Listen, could you repeat the question, because Thomas is very low.
Okay, I'm sorry. The question was if that there's any specific research or methods in terms of neurodevelopmental disorders. And yes, there is. And no, I don't know too much about it, unfortunately. But I know especially autism in terms of, because there's some claims that music enhances social and emotional skills. So there's a lot of research on that, and we also want to dig into that a little bit because we included the empathy scale. But there is a Finnish researcher who has developed a questionnaire for exactly this, like to see how music influences this sort of social emotional skills. So that's something that I don't know more.
I do have questions.
I can say it. Okay, so maybe it's a bit stupid because I'm not in the neuro part, but you said in the beginning that there is no specific area in the brain for musicality, right? But it kind of activates different areas. So like I think there was some kind of movement development area as well. Again, do you know if there are like cultural studies on that? If like different parts of the brain can be activated more in, you know what I mean?
My hunch is that there probably are some studies on this topic, but I don't know. No.
Because of course I imagine that they are to some extent related to the type of music that can activate a bit different areas. But I was also thinking about like if this activation might be influenced by prolonging.
I think if you read, I can send you that as well. It's one of the references that I had in the under, especially when it comes to emotional processing in the brain. I think maybe Stefan Kalsch, the review paper I had, may touch upon something of that kind. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I love your presentation. In fact, all of them. I wondered if you could mention a bit, if you know a bit, because you mentioned that you have a part about that is going to investigate cognitive abilities as well, to try to associate them. And to me, that makes super sense because we know there's a lot of association between musical abilities and especially language and various cognitive abilities as well, which might have been helpful for Darwin to think of. He probably didn't. Obviously, he knew everything, but this is something that maybe missed him, right? But these associations and also the genetic parallel that we have between genes, I think, in birds, right? Singing birds and humans that have similar genes in language, etc. So it makes a lot of sense that these are abilities that are very developed in humans because we're such, developed all these ways of communicating as well, and timing and language and so forth. So I just wondered if you knew a bit, if you could mention what kind of things there. If it's language and the cognitive abilities, or more working memory and things like that.
Good questions. Yeah, like you mentioned, I know, like from an evolutionary perspective, then you have these few, like in addition to humans, that are vocal learners. So you have the certain bird species, and you have some like whales, and there's some genetic stuff done there. And from NYU, I don't remember the name of the researcher. And
I was thinking more about what kind of things that you in your study.
Yeah, no, we're going to use, we had just a test of general cognitive ability, so like a matrix test and working memory, both to look at the sort of association and also to be able to control for it, so we can see like what's unique to musicality. In terms of language, I know there's a group at Vanderbilt in the US who works a lot with the intersection between music and language, and also like language disorders and music disorders and that connection. And Raina Gordon is the lab leader there, and they do excellent work with including genetics as well.
Yeah, so your study itself, part of the study, right? You're doing just part. It's more interested in maybe the connection between musical abilities and intelligence or whatever. Not the language part.
Yeah, no, not language.
It was really interesting, right? The parallels between how we speak and and the speed in which we speak and the utter and things like that, and how that's a preferred sort of timing and things. That's interesting.
There's so many similarities, and I mean that's sort of the main discussions in an evolutionary perspective as well. You have like Steven Pinker, who says that music is just auditory cheesecake, so it's just is being a parasite on some already existing structures in the brain, whereas you have the other part of the camp, Norwegian expression, who says that no, it was actually music who developed first. And it was the affective communication to be able to synchronize across large groups. So yeah, so there's a lot of different theories, but that's sort of the main two camps.
One more question. I wanted to a bit about, if you mentioned something, maybe you came across something about differences in among generations, because each generation will learn how to love a kind of music that's very specific to them. So it's okay because you are genetic, so you're following a group that's from the same generation also. But if there's anything different, because it changes a lot, we're exposed a lot to the current kind of music. If you go to a bar, etc., or if you go to a restaurant that is for older people, you will listen to that kind of other kind of music. But there must be so much variation between, even in the same culture and the same cultural, it wouldn't be a same culture, right? It's a different generation. But anyway, the same country. So the kind of music, the example that you gave was a bit of classical music. Do you have in your tests when they have to listen to music and see the beat? Was it different kinds of music, or did you prioritize classical music? Was it something that had to do with the generation itself, or sort of pop or something?
No, the tests that we used are mainly designed to not to avoid those kind of issues.
Okay.
So we did not look at that at all. But we did, but that's more when it comes to preferences. So we did assess preferences. So that's going to be very interesting to see in terms of personality, and because there's a lot of research on personality and musical preferences, and there seem to be some kind of universal preferences, not in genres, but in whether music is energetic or more low energetic. You see extroverts, they seem across the globe in all cultures seem to like more energetic music and sort of express more of themselves or whatever. So yeah, so that's, but no, we will not be looking at that.
Sorry, I said one master, but I have another master. What do you expect to find? Is it just purely exploratory, your study, or do you have some hints already that you expect that you will, from your reading and your experience, is there something that you think that will turn up with this data, or it's just really such a new field that is?
We have some, like, based on the Swedish study, for example, we have, of course, some ideas, and most behavioral genetic studies, they show heritability of like 50 or like 30 to 50%. So it will be, I guess, not so many surprises there. Yeah. I lost that track.
Maybe I thought you had like a pet result. You know, sometimes we have something that we're looking forward to.
Yeah,
nice
the first paper we're working on now is on the music capacity module from Umbach, because prior studies have used mostly like course measures of musical achievement. So how many years have you played an instrument, blah, 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 and used this dictomization, like you're a musician, you're not a musician. So, and I tried to explain earlier that you don't have to be musically trained to be a musician. You can be like a very good musician without any formal music training. So that's something that we're trying to sort of overcome and look at more these music engagement constructs. Yeah. So it will be very interesting to see, and I also look very much forward to sort of because there's not genetic studies, but on the association between personality and music, motivations for music use, why you use music at a trait level.
And musical training is something that is part of the education in Norway. Does everybody have a little bit of music education, or not really?
It used to be, but I'm not sure if
Not education. like not education, but they are exposed to music a lot. They sing a lot. I think kids in Norway, they used to sing like every school presentation, even if they're not part of any formal, they're singing.
You don't have to have a play a musical instrument, everybody, or have some kind of idea of how musical reading music, nothing like that.
Unless you choose, I guess. It's not part of the mandatory curriculum.
Okay, so that doesn't mix up your data. That's wonderful. Then it will go towards people's preferences. If they like it, they'll do that.
Yeah, but I think because this is an older, they were born between 69 and 89.
Okay.
So, and I remember that I had some musical training in my education. Yeah. But not much, but some, yeah.
No,
But yeah.
It's not that some countries will have,
Very,
have to have some kind of musical stuff. Everybody has to play an instrument, so that's good. It will mix up your data. I assume that you can spend the rest of your life, right, working with all this data.
I have so much data, so I'm really spoiled. But it took a lot of time designing the study. Not designing, but to implement and to get all the ethical approval and stuff. So it's been quite the ride.
And these tests, the people came into the lab to do the musical tests, or they did them online?
I programmed it in it's Inquisit Web. I had a picture, but I forgot to mention it. But it's an online app for psychological testing.
So that makes it much easier, right?
Yes.
It took very long to do all the tests.
Yeah. And we had quite some technical issues because people used different computers and it crashed and firewalls. So it was exciting times. I felt like IT support for 1 hour.
That helps again anyway, doesn't it? I mean, it's better still.
Yeah.
Than having to completely lose the lab.
Yeah.
People would really give up. It's lovely.
Thank you.
Need more
you.
research like this. Yeah.
Okay.
You can just say final words.
Yeah.
If you want to just say some final words and then.
Just very thankful to be here, and it's so exciting to present some of my work to you. So I hope to come back.
Okay. Oh yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sara, obrigada.
This one.